Hello everyone, welcome one and all to Rise of the Robots on the 3DO, played on a real 3DO with the real Rise of the Robots disc. The only playthrough I could find of this game was emulated, and the uploader admitted to using save states to get past the final boss, so, I had to fix that. And hopefully this game will be the perfect illustration of why I think that emulated gameplay is a bad portrayal of how games actually work. But for now, enjoy the cutscene.
ElectroCorp's dream was to produce a revolutionary robot, ultra-intelligent and capable of morphing itself to fit any task. The end product was the Supervisor droid. Then disaster. A powerful ego virus infected the Supervisor, and it began to consider its personal goals paramount to its original programming. Thinking mankind to be inferior, it introduced the virus to the other worker droids and retooled the factory, producing a legion of warrior robots. Desperate to regain control of the Metropolis 4 factory, ElectroCorp has revealed its top-secret ECO cyborg, half-human and thus incorruptible by the ego virus. You must become the mind of the cyborg. You must take control and guide this 6-foot-tall chassis of solid multi-alloy muscle and bone. You are Metropolis 4's only hope, and for all of humanity, you must succeed.
That was quite a trip to get to the main menu. That was the 3DO version of the story. This game has multiple versions, and the 3DO version differs quite a bit from the official canon version. The 3DO version story is much more simplistic. The Supervisor droid was infected with the ego virus, so were all the other androids, robots, whatever, in this building, and now they must be destroyed. Rise of the Robots, you may have heard before, is quite infamously bad. No matter which version you're playing, it's not a well-liked video game, and I don't think this version is particularly good, but if you're determined to play a console version of Rise of the Robots, this version, the 3DO version, is the one to go with, because it includes most of the animated cutscenes, it has a cohesive narrative, and it looks nice, but if you want the canon version of the game with the best presentation, best mechanics, and most nuances to the combat, you want the PC CD-ROM release. But that's not what we're playing right now. We're playing the 3DO version, and there are some things I like about the 3DO version. I think it looks quite pretty for the time period, and even though it's quite dated now, I think that because of the simplicity of the environmental designs and how everything is robotic in nature, it still holds up okay. It has a unique aesthetic to it that is certainly from the time period, but has aged admirably. I know that's probably not a common opinion, but it's mine. This status screen you're seeing before our first fight, by the way, is nearly useless. It's not that it's inaccurate or any such thing, it's just that we don't need that information, for reasons you'll see shortly. For you see, when the fight starts proper, we want to get a couple hits in, just enough that we have a health bar advantage over our opponent. Just get a couple early hits, and then we want to kick. And just keep on kicking. You see, the AI is just so dumbfounded, so awestruck at this masterful control we have over our leg muscles that it will now refuse to attack us, which means we can run the timer out and win. This is, as far as I've found, the safest way to complete the game, and the only way I've found to consistently beat the final boss. You just get a couple hits in early, more hits not necessary after you have a lead, and just kick, so that way your opponent is basically frozen in place. This strategy is simultaneously why I think the game is poorly designed, and also why I think emulated gameplay is an inaccurate way to archive video games. Because if you look up the other playthrough of this game, which is emulated and uses save states, the gameplay doesn't look like this, because he save stated his way through the final boss fight. And the final boss fight is some bullshit. It's horrendously unfair. So horrendously unfair that I spent quite a few hours playing this game overnight and losing again and again to the final boss until I found this cheesy strategy all on my own. Because that's what it took to overcome the game as designed. Yeah, you could save state your way to victory until you get a lucky roll, more or less. But that's not how the game was originally made. That's not the original art anymore. Emulated gameplay shows a cleaner, more retroactively gentrified version of what the art actually is, and I think that's wrong. I think that's not how history preservation should work. Is it more fun to play this game through emulation? I don't have a single doubt. Not only does emulation make the gameplay easier, it makes the game look nicer, and you have save states, which is probably the greatest benefit, so you don't have to start all over when you lose, and losing in general is optional. But that's for casual play. You want to emulate games? Go ahead. Emulate every game you want and have a blast. There's no wrong way to engage with art. But there is a wrong way to preserve history, and I think emulated gameplay is the wrong way to preserve history. What you're seeing right now is what I had to do to win the game as designed. This is what the game design itself drove me to, and it may not be pretty, but history is not pretty. History should be preserved warts and all. If a game is unpleasant to play, it should look unpleasant to play in the gameplay. I think people make too much of making things easier or nicer. Preserving art and preserving history isn't easy or nice. It's rough stuff, especially when the games or art are old and difficult to digest, like Rise of the Robots on the 3DO. But you're not really preserving history if you do it inaccurately. You're writing over history with something else, something nicer, but that's not what preservation is. If you're wondering, by the way, why there's no sound during the fights, but there's plenty of sound during the cutscenes, I don't know. I'm absolutely positive that the 3DO could handle music and sound effects at the same time, so I cannot fathom why the fights have no music in them. It might have been an artistic choice, but it is unique to this version of the game. So unfortunately, because of how poorly designed this game is in general, and because I've solved the game by finding the cheesiest cheese, there's not a lot to talk about in the game design or game proper, but I can talk about things relating to the game. One of them being that the rating for this game is K through A, kids to adults, which was the old equivalent to the E rating, means ages 6 and up, even says ages 6 and up on the box. I don't think that's the right rating. I think that maybe someone made a mistake. I will readily admit that from what you'll see in this video, the game seems perfectly 6 and up friendly, but presumably the people who gave this game its K to A rating didn't see the death screens. When you die in this game, there are some pretty horrifically gruesome cutscenes that play, involving decapitation, crushing the cyborg's head, and stabbing a spear through the back of the cyborg's head so that its eye gets impaled on the other end of the spear. You see that stuff, and it's not a robot head, it's a human head. Like you see the human head inside the cyborg. Granted, the graphics are old by today's standards, so now they may not look like much, but back then, seeing a human get decapitated and have their eye gouged out was kind of gross, and it still shocked me a bit to see, honestly. It's actually one of the things that drew me to purchase this game. One of the other reasons, of course, being just that I heard it's a terrible game and I wanted to see for myself, because I refused to believe that it could be as bad as people were saying, and it seemed like one of those games where even though everyone dislikes it, few people have actually played it, so I wanted to be able to say that I played it for myself so I have first-hand experience in the matter. But yeah, the gruesome death animations, definitely one of the reasons I bought the game. Did I ever watch those death animations? I watched them once when I genuinely failed the first time, and then I skipped them every other time because I don't want to see them. They make me feel bad. I think they're meant to make you feel bad. In that sense, they definitely do their job because I wanted to see them as little as possible. They were great incentive not to lose. Anyway, after we fight the military droid, we will then fight a big red guy, and then after that should be the final boss. But you're in for a surprise, I won't spoil it. But for now, we need other things to talk about. Things like, did you know that this game has a novelization? It's true. I haven't read the novelization. I dearly want to. I want to read the novelization to this more than I want to read the novelization to Balan Wonderworld, because it really does seem like there couldn't possibly be enough content in this game's world, even in the canon version, to warrant a novel. I'm just deeply, deeply curious what they could have put there. It's not like I can't fathom what a great sci-fi author might have put there. Because in the canon backstory, there's quite a lot to dig into that you could build on. But I'm just curious whether someone hired to make a novelization for Rise of the Robots would do that. Like, maybe they did. Maybe the person who made the Rise of the Robots novelization is really passionate about sci-fi and character development, and it came out great. By the way, yes, I noticed that I lost the first round against this guy. That was because I was talking with my roommate during that round, and I missed some of my inputs. You can miss a few inputs and still recover, not with the Supervisor, but with most of the other enemies. The Supervisor being the final boss, by the way. If you want to get it done 100% consistently, you want to land your jump kick on the enemy, and then you want to do one crouch kick, and then after that, standing kicks. That seems to be the 100% consistent way to get these guys locked in a loop. But for most of them, it's not necessary to be that consistent. It's only necessary for the Supervisor. While we have the time, if you're wondering roughly what the story in the canon version is, it's about the CEO of this company we're raiding right now. The CEO of this company developed a new kind of special android that could morph into anything. But that android, the Supervisor, was infected by the ego virus, much like in this version. But in the canon version, the Supervisor killed the CEO, and the cyborg that we're playing as is actually a clone of the CEO, who sees the CEO as his father, and the cyborg goes to take revenge, to kill the Supervisor for killing his father. That is, as I understand it, the story of the canon PC CD-ROM release. It may also be the story behind the PC floppy disk release. I'm not sure. The PC CD-ROM release definitely seems to be the fullest and most realized version of the game, with the most complete mechanics and cutscenes. It also has additional lore in some of the cutscenes that the 3DO version and other versions are missing, of course. And I think, given that premise, there's plenty there for a novel if you have a good writer. A writer who can write good interpersonal relationships and write good monologues for the CEO, establish his goals in life, how the cyborg clone ended up in the situation he did, how the Supervisor came to be, where the ego virus came from, who made it, the goals of everyone involved in that circumstance. There's a lot there for a potential novel. I'm just a little skeptical that someone put in the effort, is all. And I want to read the novel for that reason. I want to know. Because the story of this game, at least the canon story, I do find genuinely interesting and worth getting invested in. especially for the time period. It's, I think, a bit of an unusual story for a video game. Especially a video game in this one's circumstance, with pretensions at being the next big thing. Because everybody involved in Rise of the Robots was really wanting it to be the next big thing. Obviously, you can tell a lot of effort went into the graphics and general presentation of the game. The thing about Rise of the Robots is that it's more of a movie experience that you can occasionally interact with than it is an actual video game. Alright, so, with the Sentry defeated, that was the last unique enemy, aside from the Supervisor, in Rise of the Robots. So we should storm the Central Control Center and take down the Supervisor themselves. Here we go. Yeah, so a surprise, the game loops, and not seamlessly by any stretch of the imagination. After you beat the Sentry, you have to refight everyone you've already fought, in order, and they're not any harder this time around, you just have to go through the whole game again. Don't worry though, there is an ending, we'll still get to fight the Supervisor, it's just, we have to go through the game again, for some reason. This isn't a glitch, it's not a problem with my 3DO, it's not a problem with my game disc. The game is designed so that after you beat the Sentry on hard mode, it loops over. So now it's time to talk about Rise of the Robots' strengths and how it fails at virtually everything. Rise of the Robots, as was said, is more of a film that you occasionally interact with. It has a strong presentation, a strong story, more so in the PC CD-ROM version than in this version, but it still has a cohesive narrative here. It's an experience that you mostly watch, and occasionally you play the fight scenes instead of just look at them. And if it were just that, if it were just a series of 5 fights, and then you win, and you get to see the ending, that would be one thing. But it's not just a series of 5 fights. Because the fights, as you're seeing, aren't particularly functional for multiple reasons. The first reason being obviously that the AI is terribly broken. I feel like I've been demonstrating that very well. The second reason being that there's no reason for this game to have rounds. In the narrative, we're coming here to destroy these robots and destroy the virus alongside them. So there shouldn't be rounds or timeouts. We shouldn't win when time is up. That makes no sense narratively. That it may seem silly to say, but this is a narrative-driven experience. It front-loads you with a long cutscene before you get to the main menu. There's a lot of other cutscenes. It's theatrical in its presentation, and it's primarily focused on single-player content. You can't tell me they imagined people seriously playing this in multiplayer. So, having rounds to the fights is just obnoxious. In addition to that, of course, having the AI so broken that your fight scenes don't function properly is also a huge detriment, and the timer perhaps makes the least sense of all. We're here to destroy these machines and the virus. How does waiting a countdown timer out accomplish that? The game insists that we accomplish it even if we only wait for the timer to count down, so you can't blame that on me. I'm still using the game's own mechanics to win. And alright, so fine. The interactive part of this interactive film isn't so great. The film part's still pretty cool, right? Well, I want to say yes. I definitely want to say yes. I think the presentation is nice. The narrative in this version of the game is a little simple, but it works. The killing cutscenes, when either you or the opponent characters die, are a nice dramatic touch, and the environments are lovely to look at. They have a very surreal atmosphere about them. But it's a bad film because for some reason in the final fourth of the movie, it loops back over. I can't imagine why. It's terribly unkind to the art to have it just loop like this. You were getting invested in the narrative, you defeated the Sentry, you were about to tackle the Supervisor, and then the film loops. You're back at the start, more or less. Why? Why has this happened? Is this meant to make the film more appealing? It certainly can't be meant to make the game more appealing because, as was previously established, the interactive portions of the film are not pleasant. In fact, I find the interactive portions to be inherently unpleasant, and I feel many people would agree with me. So providing more of the interactive portions and making them identical to previous interactive portions probably isn't going to make them more enjoyable for anyone. At least I certainly would think that's not the case. What purpose does this looping over serve? Why repeat the content? And repeat it in such a way that it's bafflingly sudden, no less. It's far from subtle. It's not seamlessly integrated into the ongoing narrative or gameplay structure in any way. So what I'm left with, unfortunately, is the conclusion that it must not have been done for artistic reasons. And if it wasn't done for artistic reasons, it was most certainly done for monetary reasons. But what could those be? Well, the game's not very long. If it were only 5 fights, then a final boss, then victory, the game would be about 20 minutes. But because the game loops on itself, there's an additional 10 to 15 minutes of gameplay, and thus the game is longer and perhaps more appealing to purchase. How asinine. What a terrible way to go out. What a terrible way to ruin your own art for such a superficial benefit. Maybe a few more people will hear that your game is 30 minutes long instead of 15 minutes long, and they'll buy it because of that. Maybe they'll hear that there are 10 fights instead of 5, and they'll buy it because of that. But this stain that you've put on your artwork is there forever. It's there well past any period of time at which you could have made money on this product. You've ruined it forever, permanently. Why did you do this? Some people say my standards are low. I disagree, obviously, because they're my standards. Why wouldn't I disagree? But my standards are to look at art and see what the art is trying to be and judge its quality based on that. That's sort of how critics used to do it with theater plays, to my understanding, based on a book that I no longer have, but I adopted that after reading the book into my own worldview. I look at what art is trying to be, what it's trying to say, how it's trying to live its life, and I judge its quality based on its capacity to do such. We can assume that Rise of the Robots wanted to be a functional and challenging fighting game for the fighting game portion of its experience, because of the presence of enemies and health bars and a lot of minor things that clearly indicate the need to challenge. And it failed spectacularly at being a functional and challenging fighting game. There's just no question about that. We can also assume that it wanted to have a compelling narrative, thanks to several cues during the cinema portions of the game. And while I think the cinema portion is more complicated to diagnose in this circumstance, I think we can safely say it is also bad, due to the fact that it repeated on itself right before the climax, killing any immersion or momentum you might have felt. A lot of people, when they go about calling games bad, many of them just say, I don't like this game, therefore it's bad. Or, this game doesn't meet these arbitrary standards I went in with, therefore it's bad. What I'm saying here, I don't play that. I'm saying that this game failed itself, and that's why it's bad. It is a disappointment to itself. That is how a game ends up bad. That is what happened to Rise of the Robots. Bet you didn't expect this today. Bet you didn't expect to click on a Let's Play of Rise of the Robots and get some really thoughtful discourse about art and the perception of art and the perception of quality as associated with art. But I like to think I'm a pretty compelling and intelligent individual, so I like to bring some of that to anything I'm involved in, including Rise of the Robots. Perhaps especially Rise of the Robots, because I think Rise of the Robots deserves it, god damn it. I think Rise of the Robots deserves to be analyzed for what it was. And I have I have solace knowing that I thought harder probably than anyone else who ever disliked, or thought Rise of the Robots is bad. I came up with some damn good reasons why it's bad. I didn't go for that easy bullshit like there's only 2 special moves and the controls aren't nice like other fighting games, or the enemies aren't compelling, or the fighting engine's behind the times, or any easy, stupid nonsense like that. I came up with reasons that Rise of the Robots failed itself on fundamental levels. That's what I'm here for. You're welcome. Thank God we're back at the Sentry. I don't regret anything I've said. I may have gotten a little bit excited, but it is over 80 degrees in here, and I've had that pent up for a while because the way I perceive art is kind of abnormal. Not many people interact with art the way I do, and I wanted to get it out there, and now it's out there, and it's done, and I have closure. The Sentry, by the way, the guy we're fighting right now, he's the penultimate fight. I think he's quite easier than almost every fight before him, except for perhaps the loader. He just seems terribly easy to get into the cheese loop. And we're thankfully, after we fight this guy, we're actually going to go see the Supervisor. I promise. After we take this guy down as the Supervisor, and you'll get the ending, and the game will be over. And the Supervisor is what necessitated, that's a hard word, what necessitated this strategy to begin with, because I needed a consistent means to beat her. I could beat all the other fighters just by playing this game the way one might normally try to play it, but the Supervisor is special. She's a special brand of awful, unfair final fighting game boss fight. And since it takes 20 minutes to even get an attempt in to fight her, I needed a method to be consistent. You understand, for mental health reasons just as much as any other reason, it just wasn't happening. I wasn't going to finish this game unless I found some way to beat her pretty much guaranteed. And I did find one, as you're seeing. It's still possible to flub the inputs, as I said. When we fight her, we do have to do a jump kick, one single crouch kick, and then spam regular kick, and if we mess that up, there's a good chance we'll lose. But you get a lot of tries. You have a couple continues, and it's best to 3, so best of 3 is what I meant to say. Anyway, I'll be quiet now so you can enjoy the final boss.